everyone, welcome to my channel, Teresa's Crafty Cabana. Today I'm going to show you 3 different prints with 3 different qualities of paint. I've got some craft paints, some medium quality paints, and some fine art high quality paints. And the reason I wanted to do this, well, my husband gave me the idea that what's the difference with the different paints, and could you really see a difference in them? So I wanted to test it out and see what I figured out from this. I'm starting out with what I'm going to use as my textures on all of them. I've got some buttons that I haven't been using. I got them on sale and I have a big bag of them, so I figured I can use some of those on my jelly prints. And then I've got these dies from Sizzix, and they're kind of in different florals. I cut out a piece of rectangle cardstock and I'm just going to assemble kind of like a little texture here using those. You could put them on individually, but I wanted to lay them all down at the same time. Now each of the die cuts have these little dots in them because I'm using really thick cardstock. I think this is my 140 pound cardstock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue the part where the dots are showing through. That will be the back side of my impression plate that I'm creating. So the flat side is actually on the back side of my die cuts. And so that's what part I'm having facing up. And I'll just go through and adhere all of my little flowers. Now the reason I wanted to try this, I like the idea of florals, and sometimes they're hard to get florals from the yard or from different times of the year. There's sometimes not that many flowers growing. So I thought these die cut ones would be kind of a nice way to do some floral or botanicals without having them, right, the real kind. They're really pretty and I love the variety. You get some short ones and some tall ones. I'm just using my wet glue. And I'll set that aside for my texture once I start jelly printing. I'm going to be using my 5x7 inch jelly plate. I did clean it with some baby oil before I started because I had done some perfect pearls on my gel plate. If you ever do perfect pearls, you do want to clean it really well. And in this case, I started out with my cheapest paints, the Craft Smart and Deco Art Americana. And I'm trying to use the same color in kind of like the same color palette in each of the different qualities of paint. These are my Master's Touch acrylics. I'm basically using a version of a magenta, a blue, a turquoise, and a gold in each. And then here are my golden paints. And basically for each of these prints, I'm going to use the same design as well. Now the buttons, some of them were really cute. I didn't even notice until I looked real closely at them. This one has some neat little wide holes. Some of them said words on them. So I didn't use all my buttons. I kind of went through them and picked out the ones that I really didn't care that much about. And some of them were broken, which I was fine with jelly printing with broken ones. And I also wanted to find kind of flat backed ones or ones that had a really cool design on the front part. So I'm starting with the cheaper craft paints. You do want to make sure you mix those, especially if you haven't used your paints in a little while. The binder kind of separates in there in the paint and it will just come out as a clear liquid and it doesn't blend as well on the gel plate. I do sometimes forget to shake up my craft paints, and you can still make it work if you keep just spraying over it on your gel plate. So for this first application, I'm just using the magenta color. I'm getting a nice, I guess, thin coat on there. Not super thin that you can see all the way through to the gel plate. I did want it to be decently thin. And then I'm taking my texture that I've made with the florals, just putting that towards the bottom. And then I have this really cool sponge. It's an art sponge that I got in a set. And I'm going to use that to create some textures, but also press in the flowers to the gel plate. It has a really neat texture, so I just went ahead and covered the rest of the background with the sponge texture. Off to the side, I have a little cup with a baby wipe in it that I'll put my sponge in between my application so it doesn't dry out. And then I went ahead and removed my texture of the florals. You can see they're not too visible. I did let this dry completely before going in with my blues. So on this layer I did the turquoise blue towards the bottom and then the darker blue towards the top, and then I just made an ombre by brayering them together. Now you can already tell from the pink on this one, the pink was separating quite a bit. And at first I didn't really think much of it, but then I started thinking maybe it was because I had just cleaned my plate with the baby oil, and maybe the oils were causing a separation, but I wasn't really sure. So I'm putting my buttons on the pink part, or the pink and blue part. I just kind of dropped them on with whichever side I thought looked the most interesting. And then you do want to make sure you go and press down on each of the buttons just to get a good transfer of the button design onto the paint. I went ahead and waited for my paint to dry. Now when I pulled my buttons off, the paint underneath the buttons was still wet, but what I didn't want was to have my fingerprint or my nail showing on the gel plate as I was pulling these away. The buttons didn't leave as crisp of an impression as I was expecting, but I still have one more layer to add. I'm going to add the gold paint over the back, and that's the layer that I'm going to use to pull my print. I'm using my placement tool to help line up my paper. The paper that I'm using is 110 pound Nina White cardstock, just an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper cut in half. I let my print sit on the gel plate for about 5 minutes. I went away and did other things in between so it could dry. So this is my first print. So you can see with the craft paints, one noticeable thing, besides the fact that it isn't a very crisp image, is there's lines in in the blue, there's kind of some lines left behind with the cheaper paints. It isn't like a smooth blend of color. So that is one of the things that I notice about the cheaper paints. So then we're going to move on to the medium quality paints. Now these are my Master's Touch acrylics. This particular one came in a set, like a bunch of colors, and they're all the same quality. They're a little bit of a shinier color than the craft paints. Craft paints are more of a matte, and unless you get the shiny ones, but these in particular are definitely like a gloss. So I did all the same steps. On this one, my blue, and I couldn't find a turquoise, so it's almost like a greenish color. That was the closest I could find to a turquoise in this set. But they had a little bit of the separation of paint as well, which I wasn't expecting on the medium quality of paints. I went through and added my buttons once again. I removed one or two while they were still wet, just to see if I could pull them up, but I started noticing my fingernails, so I let them dry, and then I came in and removed the rest after the paint around them had dried. Then I let all the paint dry completely before I put my gold on. This gold is a lot brighter than the craft gold. I'm using the same quality of paper. and then I'm letting it sit with a fan. I let this one sit even a little bit longer than the first one. I probably had this one sitting for about 15 minutes. This one came up really nice. You can see the quality of the paints on this are much nicer, of course, than the craft paints. The buttons did not show through as well as I thought they would. And that could be just how I put them on there, but I'm applying them all the exact same way. So let's compare that to the best quality of paint that I have. And you may have a quality of paint that's even better than golden. I don't know. I know there's so many different varieties of paints that to me this was just the highest end quality paint that I have. So it was just kind of fun to see how different my designs looked after I did the same steps. So here I'm letting this layer dry. You can see the floral impression and the sponge impression. They're not separating on this layer. Now I was thinking that maybe because of having cleaned my gel plate, maybe these were coming out a lot smoother because the oil had kind of been washed off by now. So after I do this print, and I am adding an additional texture here over the florals, just on this one so far. And then I'm going in and adding my buttons the same way. But I wanted to see if I could get some of that gold showing through the green or turquoise color. So you can already see after letting the paint dry around the buttons that the quality of the button impression is way better than I even expected, because the first two I really couldn't see the button impressions that great. So my thought was, well, maybe now that my gel plate is warmed up a little bit, I should probably go in with my craft paints and do another round of the exact same steps and just see if I get a better quality. So maybe it was because my gel plate was too clean or too oily. So I do let my good quality paints set with my paper on it for probably left this one on for about the 15 minutes as well. And I wanted to make sure that I had a fan on it because that does help when you're trying to get the paint to adhere to the paper. Now everything about this print was very impressive to me. I loved the buttons and how you could see some of the pink, some of the blue in there, and the gold from the back side. They're very 3D looking because of all of the variety of color and texture there. And then the grasses in the front and the florals, I like the extra design. Plus they looked so dimensional because of the dark transparent colors kind of showing through, creating a little bit of a purple. It's similar to the medium quality paints, but it just looks so much better. So here I'm going to redo this one, the cheap quality paints, just going through the exact same steps, creating my floral and sponge texture, the blues. This time I'm adding my texture to the florals just like I did on the really good quality paint print. And we'll see what this one looks like. So this one, compared to the other one, the blues weren't as prominent, and it could be because I used that texture on them. And then the buttons definitely turned out a lot better. The quality of the buttons showing through. So I would probably say that part of the top part was because of the gel plate being oily. But compared to the really good quality paint, I would definitely say there is no comparison from a good quality paint to a craft quality paint. And normally I don't really think about that much of a difference because I just use one type of paint while I'm doing my printing, and whatever it is what it is, and I'm usually just happy with whatever that result is. But here, comparing them to the medium quality, and again, these are really nice. The design that I got from the medium quality is really nice, but for whatever reason, the buttons didn't come through. And then the good quality ones, because of the quality of the transparent paint, all the pink almost turns purple because of the blues in the background. And I think that's an important quality of transparent paints. Whereas on that first one, it looks very pink because the craft paints are opaque. So opaque versus transparent, you get totally different results. The quality and the way that the design even transfers on the different paints is totally different. So I love that this experiment kind of solved, why I love my golden paint so much. I knew that they were a lot better than the other paints, but seeing them side by side like this and going through the exact same steps to get to this point on all three of the types of paints just really helped me figure out, almost like when you create a swatch for your paints, this is kind of like a swatch for my gel print paints to really help me see what am I going for, and what is the purpose of my gel print. Sometimes I don't need such a high quality thing, and I'm just fine using the craft paints if it's something that's going to be in the background and covered up mostly. But I just thought this was a really great experiment, and thank you to my husband for giving me the idea to do this. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. What did you think about this comparison? Have you done a comparison like this before? Were you surprised by the results? I was quite shocked that the golden paints were that much better than the other paints. Alright, well, thanks for watching, and as always, happy crafting, y'all.